Today we're going to talk about Oxford Then and Now, my first Then and Now book I photographed and wrote, and Cambridge Then and Now, for which I did the same. And we'll start with Cambridge. Here they are. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. The teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey teacher! Leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall. Well, what's that got to do with Cambridge? Well, quite a lot. When I, in the early 70s, I got a job teaching at a Cambridge college for a short time, and I took digs not far from the college on Hills Road, opposite it almost, with a teacher, actually, a headmistress of a school called Mrs. Mary Waters, and her son was Roger Waters, who wrote that, which is rather ironic because he was sent to what is now the sixth form college, Hills Road Sixth Form College in Cambridge, which of all the state schools in the UK has the highest number of successful applicants to Oxford and Cambridge, and before that it was a grammar school. It did very well at all. So I always thought of that when I went there and started to photograph Oxford and Cambridge, particularly Cambridge. But I wanted to look first of all at the little things in Cambridge. Well, they're not that little, that's interesting about it. Places that, not all the famous places, but places that are less famous, like this one here, which was a pub called the Eagle on Bennett Street, which is just a sort of nice little pub, like this one. Here it is, in the 1950s. Very pretty. And here it is today. Well, what's interesting about that? Well, apart from the beer's pretty good, I have to say. But it was there that somebody called Francis Crick and James Watson ran in and startled the drinkers one lunchtime in 1953 to say they discovered something called a double helix, which of course gave them access to the DNA, which carries genetic information, and of course that had a huge effect on medical treatment and on our health. Same as more recently the work in Oxford on the Oxford vaccine has certainly, well, some of us may not be sitting here now, including you or me or whatever, if they hadn't come along with that. We don't need another brick in the wall. All in all, another brick in the wall. Well, talking about education, the most famous group of buildings in Cambridge, and possibly in Britain, and maybe in some of the most famous group of buildings in the whole world, are here on the backs in Cambridge, the King's College Chapel and the Gibb building next to it, which is extraordinary. And there you can see, unchanged as it is today, kept perfectly, that sort of contrast between the classical severity of the building on the right and of course on the left the King's College Chapel, which is high perpendicular, the contrast between two styles. And it's interesting that this whole area used to be a terrible mess before those buildings were built. It was full of little shacks and it was basically Cambridge's wharf where all the boats and things came in, and it's full of shacks and slipways and things like that. It's all cleared away, all tidied up, and these buildings were erected because, remember, Cambridge was a market town, and as well as a small port on a river port it was. All in all, another brick in the wall. All in all, another brick in the wall. I must say I preferred Cambridge in many ways to Oxford. Oxford is very busy. It's almost like an extension of London. We'll come on to talk about that in a minute. And there are reasons for that, but Cambridge is much more like a market town. In fact, it is a market town. It's a market town with a university inserted into it. It's still a market town. And it's very much like other market towns in Eastern England. I was from one of them. I'm from Newark-on-Trent on the A1. But it could also be a part of, I felt as I could be at home in Newark, or I could be in Grantham or Stamford or King's Lynn, one of those unassuming market towns that are very pretty, small scale. And you can see here that you've got the sort of building could be as grand as they like, but in the centre of the town, centre of the city, is Market Day in Market Hill, where in fact Cambridge started, as it did in Newark and Stamford and all these places. Here it is today. And you can see peeping around the back the Cambridge colleges. And I think that juxtaposition is particularly charming. You can see it here as well on Magdalen Street, here in the 19th century. Buildings there, and then very much unchanged today. Magdalen College is on the right, and it was Magdalen College where, in a way, Harvard University in America started, because somebody from there, an alumnus, Henry Dunster, was called in to be the undermaster at Harvard when it was established. They wanted to get a chap called Comenius as the master of the college, because they called it a master at this place at Cambridge, Magdalen. But the undermaster there is called the president. And so they got Dunster in, but he was too unassuming. He said, I'll just be the president then, because Comenius, who from Czechoslovakia, hasn't turned up. And Comenius appointed him to be the master of the college in Harvard, because he was the first person we know of, certainly in the 17th century, who invented the idea of universal education, a university for everybody, not just for university students, for everybody, schools and so on. And they wanted him, but he didn't come and take up the post, so it ended up with Dunster as the president, and so that term became fixed in America, the president of Harvard, and it's from there that you get the president of the United States. Funny, wouldn't it be, if he was called the Master of the United States, especially Donald Trump, the Master of the United States, which brings me on to in a strange way, a roundabout way, to Oxford. And when I was photographing Oxford, I had something very annoying happen every day I was trying to photograph, and that was something which I call the elephants. Nelly the elephant packed her trunk and said goodbye to the circus. Off she went with a trumpety tramp, trump, trump, trump. The head of the herd was calling far, far away. They met one night in a silver light on the road to Mandalay. How about this one though? And Donald the elephant packed his trunk and said goodbye to the circus. Off he went with a trumpety trump, 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 trump. His boating bass was calling far, far away. They met one night in a silver light on the road to Florida. Oh, Donald the elephant packed his trunk and trundled back to the jungle. Off he went with a trumpety trump, 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 trump. I was thinking of the trumpety trumpety trump and the elephants when I was photographing Oxford, because the things that were getting in the way that were trumpety trumps, I said, were the buses. Huge buses everywhere, especially 10, 12 years ago. They were puthering out fumes. You could hardly, it choked you. You had to get a photograph in a split second. A bus wasn't there. The whole of the centre of Oxford had become a sort of like a, I don't know, it was like a bus station basically. And there were competing companies I had. And so every bus route was doubled up or trebled up, and you couldn't move for buses. It was absolutely appalling, and nobody seemed to do anything about it at all. And I know that Oxford has always been busy, but this was absolutely ridiculous with these buses everywhere. So I always think of Nellie the elephant, or more appropriately Donald the elephant. And here is the centre of Oxford, Carfax. You can see how busy it was even in the 19th century. There you see, and the same view today, with crowds of people in the street. And you accept the fact that that in fact there's lots and lots of traffic and things. But one of the things about Oxford also, it's much more, in a way, it's more worldly in a way. It's not as quiet as Cambridge, not as elegant, but I think it's interesting that Cambridge is possibly more famous for its scientists and its philosophers and so on than Oxford, which is more sort of like engaged in the world of here and now, and always has been right from the time of the time of Mary the First, when the Catholic reintroduction and those local Protestant martyrs were burnt at the stake in the centre of Oxford. Monuments are still there, of course. So it's always been politically engaged, Oxford has, and in fact it's no surprise that nearly every Prime Minister of Britain is an Oxford graduate, and that sort of political sort of engagement is still going on. I mean, look at the row. Well, let's go and look at, say, a building of Oriel College, the roads construction building. I don't mean building roads. I mean the roads building. Cecil Rhodes. Here we are. This is a street in Oxford before Oriel College built, with Cecil Rhodes' huge money he made in South Africa, built the Rhodes building, gave them the money to build this great big edifice here. And in the centre, at the top there, you can see, up here, you can see the statue of Cecil Rhodes, which the students, and not just students, want torn down because he represents a sort of exploitation in South African gold and diamond mines, ill treatment of Africans. But you also see a similar situation here, of all places. All Souls College, the most exclusive college in Oxford and Cambridge. To be a fellow of All Souls is a pinnacle of academic achievement anywhere in the world. And in the middle, by the way, is these two wonderful great towers were built by Nicholas Hawksmoor, designed, and in fact they inspired a lot of things. They inspired, say, the building of some of the first skyscrapers in America, the Woolworth building, for example, and of course you can see the buildings of the Soviet skyscrapers in Moscow. You can see like Moscow University, but it's on the left, that building there, which has caused the most row recently, and that's the beautiful Codrington building, which is the library for All Souls. Well, that money came from Codrington himself, who was a slave owner, very, very rich slave owner in Barbados. So you can imagine that has stood for centuries, but now, of course, I don't think they're going to turn it down, but they want things explaining things all over the place because he was such a terrible chap, owning slaves. Well, also I love this picture I just got this porter running past. Do you see the bottom there, he reminded me, and he's in black, but he reminded me of the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. And in fact, the whole idea of these Then and Now books that I did, it was first started there where I was photographing, where you put a photograph of the past against one of the present. The past was like looking into a parallel universe, another world, a bit the way that Lewis Carroll made us look into, go through down a rabbit hole or walking through a looking glass into a parallel universe. And you also see it with C.S. Lewis and people going through the back of back of a wardrobe, and so on, and also with other Oxford writers use the same sort of technique. And I wondered where they got it from, and I realised one of the reasons is this juxtaposition, I thought, between the busyness of these Oxford streets, buses or not, trowels always being busy, and then you walk through a gateway, just a gateway, and you enter this sort of like a different world, a paradise world of these beautiful buildings that's quiet, a pin could drop from the noise and bustle of another world, both next to each other, both real, but in a sense both very much separate and in a way artificial. It made you sort of step back and think about these different places that didn't relate to one another at all, but were real in their own right. Anyway, so much for the philosophising about it. You don't want to listen to all that stuff, do you? All that learned baloney. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave those kids alone. Hey teacher! Leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the world. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave those kids alone. You know what? As I say, I come from Newark, and all I say about fucking Oxford and Cambridge, we're sick of experts. They can fuck off. Don't want to hear what they have to say about things, do you? All in all, another brick in the wall. All in all, another brick in the wall.